My name is Nadia Wells, and I want to tell you about the last dinner I ate across from my husband before he left me for another woman. He helped himself to more rice. He laughed at something on his phone. He called me baby twice. In the guest bedroom, under the mattress, I had already found the hotel receipt with his name on it and a bracelet that did not belong to me. I had already spoken to an attorney, and in the locked room at the end of our hall, the room he spent 9 years walking past without a single question, sat 9 years of something he had no idea existed. He thought I was the steady, invisible woman he had outgrown. He was building an exit. I was building something else entirely, something worth $500 million. What happened 3 months later, I don't think he is fully recovered from. Let me tell you how I got here. Before we dive in, comment where you're watching from today. And if stories like this speak to you, hit subscribe, because tomorrow's story is even more intense. The coffee was always mine. That's the thing nobody tells you about a long marriage. You stop sharing the small rituals and start protecting them. Dion didn't wake until 7. I was up at 5, every morning, in that kitchen with the overhead light off and just the under-cabinet strip on. And for those 2 hours, the whole house breathed differently. Slower. Cleaner. Mine. I ironed his shirts on Tuesdays and Thursdays, 2 of them, always. I'd set up the board by the kitchen window, let the steam build, and work through them while the coffee finished brewing. I didn't resent it. I want to be honest about that. I did it because I was that kind of woman, the kind who keeps things running and doesn't make noise about it. My mother was that woman. I watched her iron my father's shirts for 23 years, and I swore I'd never be her. And then, somewhere between 26 and 37, I became her anyway, just with better shoes. You know what the strangest part of suspicion is? It doesn't announce itself. It just settles in, like a smell you can't locate, low and constant and wrong. I had felt it for months. Something shifted in Dion around last spring. His phone started going face down on the counter. He laughed differently, sharper, like he was performing it. He started sleeping in the guest room in late September. Bad back, he said. The mattress is firmer in there, he said. I told myself he wasn't lying. I told myself I was tired and reading into things the way tired women do. I'm not sure I believed myself, but I kept ironing the shirts. That Saturday morning, 3 weeks into his guest room arrangement, I went in to change the linens. It was ordinary, completely ordinary. I stripped the pillowcases first, then the fitted sheet, and when I lifted the mattress corner to pull it free, the receipt slid out and landed on the floor between my feet. I picked it up. The Emory Grand Hotel, Atlanta, October 14th. 1 night, 1 room. Dion A. Wells. October 14th was the Saturday he told me he had a conference in Savannah. My hands went still. I stood there holding that slip of paper, and I felt the floor shift in a way that had nothing to do with the floor. I read his name twice. I read the date twice. Then I set the receipt on the nightstand and finished making the bed. Because that is the kind of woman I am. Or was. Or maybe still am. I finished the job. I smoothed the corners. I straightened the pillow. Then I checked the headboard. I don't know what made me do it. Some instinct that had been waiting for permission. I ran my fingers along the slat where the headboard met the wall. And there it was. A thin gold chain caught between the wood. I worked it free carefully. A bracelet. Delicate. The clasp faced up, and I turned it over without thinking. T.B. engraved in small, clean letters inside the clasp. I held it in my palm for a moment. It was light. Cheaper than it looked. I thought, oddly, about the bracelet Dion had given me for our 7th anniversary. Heavy white gold, something he'd spent real money on. I still had it in my jewelry box. I hadn't worn it in over a year. I put the hotel receipt and the bracelet in my pocket. I finished the bed. I closed the guest room door behind me. Dinner that night was leftover pasta and a conversation about nothing. Dion told me about a difficult client in Buckhead. I listened. I asked one question. I passed him the bread. I watched his hands, his mouth, the easy way he leaned back in his chair like a man with nothing on his conscience. I had spent 11 years learning that face. And I sat there at my own kitchen table, wondering how many expressions on it had been rehearsed. I cleared the dishes. I said goodnight at 9:30. I said I was tired. I waited until I heard him in the guest room, the creak of that firmer mattress, the silence that followed. Then I went to the kitchen, sat down at the table in the dark, and called my best friend, Renee Holt, who I had known since we were both too young to know anything, and who had spent 12 years as a paralegal before she retired, and who I trusted with every version of myself I'd ever been. She answered on the second ring. She always does. I told her about the receipt. I told her about the bracelet. I told her the date, the hotel name, the initials. I kept my voice even and low, the way you keep your voice when you are working very hard not to fall apart. When I finished, Renee was quiet for exactly 4 seconds. "What are you going to do?" she said. "Find out everything," I said, "before I do anything." I opened the kitchen junk drawer. I put the receipt and the bracelet inside, underneath the takeout menus and the dead batteries we'd been meaning to throw away for years. I closed the drawer. I went to bed. I didn't sleep, but that wasn't the point. The point was I had made a decision, and decisions, once made, have a way of holding you upright. The next morning, I ironed his shirts. I know how that sounds, but I want you to understand something. The ironing wasn't weakness. The ironing was cover. You don't tip your hand before you know what you're holding. I drove to work. I sat at my desk. I answered phones and scheduled meetings and smiled at the right moments. And at 12:15, I walked to my car in the parking deck, locked the doors, and opened LinkedIn on my phone. I typed in the name of Dion's company first. Then I went to employees. Then I sat there for a second with my thumb hovering, because some part of me still wanted to be wrong. You know how that is, that last breath before the thing becomes completely real. TB, 2 initials on a cheap gold bracelet. I typed T in the search bar and started scrolling. I found her in under 3 minutes. Tanya Briggs, 29, listed as a regional sales associate at Dion's company. Her profile photo was polished. Professional smile, good lighting, the kind of photo you take when you're trying to look like someone going somewhere. She'd been at the company for just over 2 years. 2 years. I screenshotted her profile, her photo, her job title, the company name. I screenshotted all of it, calm and methodical, the same way I process vendor invoices at work. Just data. Just information to be organized and used. My hands were steady the whole time. That scared me more than shaking would have. That evening, Renee called before I could call her. "I have a name for you," she said. "Family Law." She's good, methodical, doesn't waste time, and she doesn't like men who think charm is a legal strategy. I wrote down the number. I called before 7. My attorney, who I would come to think of as the most unimpressed woman I had ever met in the best possible way, had a cancellation that Thursday. I took it. After I hung up, I sat for a moment at the kitchen table and let myself feel it, the specific relief of having a next step. Not safety, not resolution, just the next step. It was enough to keep me upright. Then I opened the laptop and pulled up our finances. We had 3 joint accounts, checking, savings, and what I thought was a closed credit card from early in our marriage. Dion had told me 2 years ago that he'd paid it off and closed it. I had believed him because there was no reason not to. Because I was the kind of woman who trusted the man she'd spent 9 years building a life with. The account wasn't closed. The balance was $34,218. I sat there and read that number twice. Then I started scrolling through the charges. And let me tell you, there is a particular kind of stillness that comes over you when you are reading a 2-year record of your husband's other life laid out in transaction history. Hotels, flights, restaurants and cities he told me he was working in, at restaurants no one goes to alone, at price points that don't belong on a business expense card. I cross-referenced the dates against every work trip he'd taken in 2 years. I had the calendar. I always maintained it, because Dion could never keep track of his own schedule without me. The man couldn't find his own keys without calling my name. Every single date matched. Not most of them. Every 1. I thought about the nights I'd worked late to cover our mortgage when Dion said the commission cycle was slow. I thought about the weekend last February when I picked up a Saturday shift at the office, voluntary, unpaid, just to get ahead, while he told me he was in Birmingham for a regional meeting. There's a charge from that Saturday. A restaurant in Midtown Atlanta, dinner for two, $162. I remembered making soup that night. I remembered eating it alone. My jaw locked. I held it there. I kept scrolling. At 9:45, I closed the laptop, not because I was done. I was not done, not even close, but because there is a limit to how much clarity a person can absorb in a single sitting, and I had hit mine. I had what I needed for Thursday. I had screenshots, dates, a balance, a name. I had a pattern so clean it would have insulted my intelligence to keep questioning it. I sat in the quiet kitchen for a moment. Down the hall, I could hear the guest room, the creak of that mattress, then nothing. He was already asleep, already comfortable, already certain, I imagine, that his life was exactly where he'd arranged it. Let him sleep. That was the decision I made right there, at that kitchen table, with the laptop closed in front of me, and $34,000 of evidence sitting in a browser I hadn't refreshed since 9:15. I would say nothing. I would show nothing. Not until I sat across from my attorney and understood exactly what protection looked like. Not until I knew the complete shape of what I was dealing with. He wasn't getting a single thing from me before I was ready. I turned off the kitchen light and went to bed. 1 week later, Thursday, 6:58 p.m. I knew before I opened the front door. His car wasn't in the driveway. That alone wasn't unusual. Dion kept odd hours, always had some reason to be somewhere else. But there was a quality to the absence. The driveway felt different, too still, too final. I stood on the porch for just a second, keys still in my hand. Then I went inside. The closet told the whole story. His side, the right side, the one he'd organized by color because he was particular about that, was half empty. Not ransacked, not hurried-looking, deliberate. He'd taken the good suits, the dress shirts I ironed every week, the shoes he saved for client meetings. He left the everyday things, the worn things, the things that didn't represent the version of himself he was trying to be. The bathroom was worse somehow. Just a strip of bare counter where his things used to be. No razor, no cologne. No, the specific brand of deodorant I'd been buying him for 9 years without him ever once having to ask. I stood in the bathroom doorway for a moment. My chest felt tight. Then I went to the kitchen, because I already knew there was a note. It was on the counter, folded in half, my name written on the front in his handwriting. Neat, deliberate. He'd thought about this. Nadia, I've been unhappy for a long time. I have feelings for someone else, and I think separation is the best thing for both of us. I hope you can understand. Dion Wells. His full name. Like I might not know which Dion. I read it twice, not because I needed to. The first read was sufficient. But I wanted to make sure I absorbed every word, every choice he made in the writing of it. He said unhappy, not wrong or sorry or I never meant to hurt you. Unhappy, as though the 11 years I gave him were a job he'd been quietly suffering through. I folded it back in half. I called my attorney first. She answered on the second ring, which I had already come to appreciate about her. I told her what I came home to. She said, "Good, this simplifies things considerably." She used the word abandonment with a calm precision that I found deeply steadying. We spoke for 12 minutes. By the end, I had a list of 3 things to do by Monday morning. Renee called at 9:15 that night. She had a contact at Dion's office, someone who owed her a favor and paid it without being asked twice. Dion had moved into Tanya Briggs's apartment. That same night. He hadn't found somewhere new, hadn't rented a hotel while he figured things out. He'd gone straight there. He had somewhere to land before he ever wrote that note. You know what that means. It means the note wasn't a confession. It was a formality. He had already chosen, already packed in his head long before he packed that closet, and the note was just the paperwork of a decision made in someone else's bed. My hands went still on the counter. Then I put the phone down, just briefly, and walked down the hall to the spare room. I unlocked it, turned on the light, stepped inside. I won't describe everything in it just yet. That story has its own time. But I will tell you that I stood in that room, in the quiet of a house that was now completely mine, and I breathed, for the first time, all evening. Some rooms carry the weight of what you've built. This one had been carrying mine for 9 years. I sat down at the desk. I opened my laptop. There was an email from my business partner at NW Collective, the holding company I'd built around Crown Theory, my natural hair care brand, 9 years in the making, started with $800 and a second-hand mixer in this exact room. The email had arrived at 4:47 p.m. I had been sitting in a staff meeting at 4:47 p.m., nodding along to a quarterly report while this was waiting for me. The subject line said, "It's done." The licensing deal, 14 months of negotiation, 14 months of conference calls and revised term sheets and patience that had cost me more than I ever let show, had closed. The valuation was finalized. $500 million. I read it once. I sat back. I looked at the ceiling of the room my husband had called storage for 9 years and never once thought to ask about. My phone rang. Renee. "Now?" she said. One word. She meant, is it time to go public? Time to step out from behind the brand and let the world know who built it? I looked at the folded note sitting on the edge of the desk where I'd carried it without thinking. I picked it up, walked back to the kitchen, opened the junk drawer, the receipt, the bracelet, both still there, and set the note in with them. "Not yet," I said. I closed the drawer. I went back to the spare room, sat down at my desk, and opened the licensing agreement. I read every page. When I was done, I turned off the light and went to bed. I wasn't happy. I was ready. There's a difference. And that night, for the first time in a long time, I understood exactly which one mattered. Friday morning, 6:43 a.m. I woke up in the center of the bed, not my side, the center. Both pillows, all the space. It wasn't a statement. I was just tired enough that my body had spread out the way bodies do when nothing is crowding them anymore. I lay there for a minute and noticed that. Then I got up. The master bathroom was mine now, too. No bare strip of counter, no cologne smell fading from the towels. Just my things, arranged the way I'd always arranged them when I had the room to do it right. I made coffee. I opened my laptop at the kitchen table. My attorney had sent a document request the evening before, a clean, itemized list of what she needed to build the fullest picture of our marital finances. She wasn't asking for anything I didn't already have. I had been quietly pulling this together since the night I found the receipt, organizing folders the way I organize everything, by date, by amount, by paper trail. I spent the next 2 hours going through it. You know what's funny about financial damage? It doesn't announce itself. It accumulates in the background, quiet as interest, while you're busy living your life and trusting the person sitting across from you at dinner. The credit card first. $34,000. Hotels, flights, restaurants. 41 months of charges I had assumed were business expenses because Dion told me his company reimbursed irregularly. He said the accounting department was slow. I believed him because why wouldn't I? I was working. I was building. I had no reason to audit my own husband. Then the personal loan. $18,000, taken out against our joint credit profile 8 months ago. I had signed something. I remembered it now. A refinancing document he'd handed me while I was between calls. Said it was just restructuring. Said it was better for our rate. I signed it. He used it to consolidate debt I didn't know existed and free up room on the card he was using to take her to dinner. My chest went tight at that one. Not because of the money, because of the moment. Him handing me a pen, me trusting him enough not to read the full document, the specific intimacy of being deceived by someone who knows exactly how much you trust them. I remember the smell of that Saturday morning, pancakes I'd made from scratch, the radio on low, him leaning against the counter telling me it was just paperwork. I remember thinking he looked relaxed, happy even. He was. I kept going. The mortgage shortfalls ran back 22 months. Dion had told me his bonus structure had changed. New regional metrics. The company was tightening things. His variable pay had dropped. I didn't question it. I picked up evening hours at a second job, a contract admin role, 3 nights a week. I told myself it was temporary. I told myself we were a team and teams adjusted. What I didn't know, what my attorney's careful arithmetic was now making very, very clear, was that his income had not changed. His direct deposits were fully intact, every single month. He had simply redirected the difference to himself, to a version of his life I was not invited into. My jaw locked. I called my attorney at 9:15. She had already begun cross-referencing the bank records I'd sent the week before. Her tone was the same as always, unhurried, unimpressed, precise. She used the word documentable 4 times in 12 minutes. That word was doing a lot of work, and I appreciated every ounce of it. All of it? I asked. Every line, she said. Renee called that afternoon, just past 2. She had heard from her contact inside Dion's office, the same person who confirmed where he'd gone that Thursday night. She didn't ease into it. Renee never eases into anything when she thinks you need the straight version. The affair started 2 years ago. Not months, years. She had a rough date, early spring, 2 years back. Her contact remembered because Tanya had started coming into the office differently around that time. New energy, private smiles, the particular glow of someone who believes she's won something. 2 years ago. I sat with that for a moment. 2 years ago was the exact month I started working evenings, the month I rearranged my entire schedule. 3 nights a week, contract admin work, skipping dinners and board calls I had to reschedule twice, because my husband told me we needed the extra income. Because he said things were tight. He wasn't covering a shortfall, he was creating one. He freed up money, freed up evenings, freed up the house, and told me the story I needed to hear to make all 3 possible at once. My hand was already moving before I was fully aware I'd reached for the legal pad. I wrote in columns. Dates on the left, dollar amounts in the middle, incidents on the right. First entry, April, 2 years ago. Affair begins. Evening contract work begins same month. I kept writing. My handwriting was neat and even all the way down the page. My jaw stayed locked the entire time. My handwriting did not waver. That evening, I unlocked the spare room. Not with ceremony. I just turned the key, pushed the door back as far as it would go, and left it open. Like opening a window, like letting air in. I stood in the doorway for a moment and looked at it. 9 years of work looked back at me. The formulation tables ran along the left wall, 2 of them, deep-surfaced, the kind you can actually work on without running out of room. Measuring tools hung on hooks above the second table, still arranged the way I'd put them when I set up the room 7 years ago. The shelves on the right held Crown Theory product in every form it had ever taken. Early jars with handwritten labels, mid-period bottles with the first real logo I designed myself on a free template at 2 a.m, all the way to the current line in its clean, deep amber packaging. 47 iterations. I know the number because I counted them once, because they all meant something. The corkboard was above the door. 61 rejection letters. I had pinned every single one. Let me tell you something about a woman who builds alone. She does not do it because it is easy. She does it because the alternative, standing still, is the one thing she cannot survive. 9 years ago, I had $800 and a secondhand mixer I found on an online resale board for $40. The mixer had a crack in the base that I sealed with epoxy and electrical tape, and it worked fine for 3 years before I replaced it. I still have it. It's on the bottom shelf. I sat down at the workbench. I was 28. I'd spent years buying products that were made by people who had never once thought about my hair. Not seriously, not in the way that matters, not the way you think about something when the answer has to actually work. I tried everything. I adjusted. I read ingredient lists and research papers and old home remedy threads I printed out at the library because my home internet was slow. And eventually I thought, I can do this better. Not as a feeling, as a fact. The first batch was a deep conditioning cream. I made it on a Sunday in January, in this room, with the heat turned low to save on the bill. I remember the cold and the smell, shea and rosemary, warm from the process, even in that cold little room. I put it in my hair that night and sat at the table and cried. Not from sadness, from the specific, overwhelming feeling of something working exactly as you designed it to. I still can't fully explain that feeling. I just know I've been chasing it ever since. I named the brand Crown Theory because I still believe, that every Black woman deserves hair care built for the specific crown she carries. Not adapted for her, not modified toward her, built for her, starting with her, ending with her. That was the whole premise. That was the whole business. I built the structure before I built the revenue. That part was intentional. I had watched too many small Black-owned businesses, good ones, real ones, businesses that women had poured themselves into, get quietly claimed once they started to look like something. A partner who decided he deserved equity, a family member who remembered a loan once the numbers got interesting, someone who felt entitled to a piece of what they'd watched you build, simply by virtue of having been nearby while you built it. I wasn't going to let that happen to mine. So I set up NW Collective as the parent structure first, before Crown Theory earned its first dollar. I was the sole owner of record. I documented every investment I made from personal funds I had separately held and separately tracked. I was bulletproof before the brand had a label. That was on purpose. Everything I did was on purpose. Dion knew I had what he called a little business. A hobby is what he meant. He said it once, that little side thing you're always working on. And he said it the way people say things they find harmless and small. I didn't correct him. I went back to work. He never once asked what it was. Not once in 9 years. Not the name, not the product, not what I was doing in this room 3 and 4 mornings a week while he was still asleep. I came to bed after midnight some nights, and he turned over and pulled the covers up, and that was it. He never asked. You know what I think now? I think he didn't ask because he wasn't curious. And he wasn't curious because he had already decided I didn't have anything he needed to know about. That is the thing about being underestimated by someone who loves you. It doesn't feel like cruelty, it just feels like being looked through. I reached for the first prototype on the shelf, unlabeled jar, the white cream gone slightly off color with time, the lid I had sealed with a strip of painter's tape in my own handwriting. Batch 1, January. I held it in both hands. I set it back on the shelf. I turned off the workbench lamp, walked out of the room, and left the door open when I went to bed. 3 weeks after Dion left. The press release went out on a Tuesday morning at 9 o'clock. I had written the first draft of it 14 months ago, the same week the licensing negotiations started. I had revised it 11 times. The final version was 4 paragraphs, clean and direct, and it named me by my full name in the first sentence. Nadia Wells, founder and chief executive of NW Collective and its flagship brand, Crown Theory. I sent it from my desk in the spare room. The door was open. By noon, the phones at my business partner's office were ringing. I had chosen the timing the same way I chose everything else, on purpose, down to the day. The deal had to be fully closed. The ink had to be dry and filed and beyond anyone's ability to contest before my name was attached to that number publicly. My attorney had been clear about that, and I had agreed with her before she finished the sentence. A $500 million valuation announced in the middle of an active divorce proceeding, before the asset structure was firmly established as separate property, that was a door I was not going to leave cracked. So I waited. That's what not yet meant. That's what I told Renee the night Dion left, when the deal had just closed privately and I was standing in this room looking at his note on the counter. It wasn't patience. It was precision. There is a difference. Within 48 hours of the release, a regional business magazine ran a cover profile. The woman behind the brand. Full page, my photo, me in my own product, wearing nothing performed, looking exactly like myself. They'd taken the shot 3 weeks earlier, in this room, right there between the shelves, and I had told the photographer not to retouch it. She looked at me like I was making her job harder. I said, "Leave it exactly as it is." It ran exactly as it was. You know what happens when a story like that hits a small city's business circuit? It moves fast, real fast. Renee called me the morning after the magazine dropped. "His whole office is talking," she said. She had a contact over there, someone who had known us both for years and had no particular loyalty to Dion. "People who met you at his company Christmas parties. People who thought you were just—" She paused. "You know." "His wife, the admin," I said. "Yeah." I let that sit for a second. My jaw didn't lock, my hands didn't go still. I had already processed that particular truth a long time ago. Being invisible to people who never looked, that wasn't new information. What was new was the math they were now doing in their heads, trying to reconcile the woman they'd looked through at those holiday dinners with the name on that magazine cover. Let them reconcile. Renee told me the rest. Dion had been at a gas station 2 days after the magazine hit stands. He'd seen it in the rack at the register. She heard it secondhand from the same contact, that he just stood there, didn't buy it, didn't move, just stood there with his hand still on the rack. I thought about that image for about 10 seconds, then I let it go. What I didn't let go was the call I received that same afternoon from my attorney. Dion's attorney had contacted her requesting an urgent meeting, not a scheduled check-in. Urgent, the word he apparently used twice. He had seen the public filing attached to the licensing deal. He knew NW Collective existed. He did not yet know the full valuation. That number hadn't cleared into public record. But he knew enough to understand that what he had assumed was a negligible asset was something considerably larger than negligible. My attorney's voice on the phone was measured and unbothered, in the way I had come to trust. "He's going to want to claim a stake," she said. "He'll argue marital contribution." And he'll be wrong. She said it flat, the way you say something that is simply true. NW Collective was capitalized entirely from your premarital and separately tracked funds. It predates the marriage by 2 years. There was no commingling. I've been building this file for 3 weeks. There is nothing for him to claim. I said, "Good." She said, "He's not going to like that answer." I said, "That's not my concern." That evening, I sat at my workbench with a copy of the magazine. I looked at the photograph. I looked at her, at me, for a long moment. The woman on that cover had been in that room before 5 in the morning more times than she could count. She had worked through the particular exhaustion that doesn't come from one bad night, but from years of them, accumulated and carried forward without complaint. She had ironed shirts and made coffee and covered shortfalls and said, "I'm fine," when she was not fine. And she had built something in a room her own husband dismissed as storage. And she had protected it with a structure so clean and precise that 11 years of marriage couldn't touch a dollar of it. My mother worked herself hollow for a man who never once turned to look at what she had given him. She gave him everything, and he took it like it was owed. I watched that my whole life. I swore I was different. I almost wasn't. I closed the magazine. I had a board call in 10 minutes. I went to my desk, 4 weeks after the public reveal. I found it wedged behind the bottom shelf, shoved back against the baseboard like it had been kicked there in a hurry. Dion's old tablet. The gray one with the cracked corner he'd replaced 2 years ago, and apparently forgot he ever owned. I set it on the workbench and plugged it into a charger I had to dig out of a box. Then I went back to sorting. There wasn't much left of his in that room. A few cables, a jacket he must have missed, a coffee mug with a sales conference logo on the side. Small things. The kind of things a man leaves behind when he's too excited about where he's going to pay attention to what he's leaving. I gave the tablet 15 minutes. When the screen came on, I didn't have to do anything. It opened straight to a messaging app. No passcode, no lock screen. Dion had always been careless about the things he assumed no one would ever look for. The thread was right there at the top. T. Briggs. 2 years of messages. The scroll bar was a thin sliver at the edge of the screen. I sat down. You want to know what it actually feels like to read something like that? It doesn't feel like fire. It doesn't feel loud. It feels like standing in a room you thought you knew and watching the walls go completely transparent. And suddenly you can see every conversation that ever happened just outside your line of sight. Cold, still, and very, very clear. He called me boring. That specific word more than once across more than a year of messages. She's just boring, babe. Then later, after a dinner we'd had with friends, a dinner where I remembered laughing, where I remembered thinking we were fine. She's so predictable it's embarrassing. He called my body comfortable. Not cruel, he said, just honest. He said I had peaked, said I'd been the same person for 10 years and that a woman who doesn't grow becomes furniture. My jaw locked. I kept reading. He said Tanya made him feel like a real man, said she challenged him, said being with me was like running in place, technically motion, but going nowhere. Tanya's side of the thread was exactly what you'd expect. You deserve so much better. She doesn't even see you. I'm so glad you finally did something for yourself. Warm, practiced, the kind of support that isn't really about the other person at all. She knew about me. She used my name sometimes. She knew what I looked like. She just didn't care. They mocked me together. The woman who was up before dawn ironing his shirts while he slept. The woman who had worked evening shifts to cover the mortgage the same month. I could see the dates. The same month they were in a hotel in Savannah on what he told me was a regional sales summit. I remembered making extra coffee that morning so he'd have some when he got back. I remembered thinking I was being thoughtful. My hands went still on the tablet. Here's the thing about Dion. He used the exact words I had once given him. In our bed, in the dark, in the kind of quiet where you trust someone with the version of yourself you don't show anyone else. I had told him once that my biggest fear was being easy to overlook, that I worried my steadiness read as smallness, that I was afraid of peaking too early and not knowing it. He had held my hand. He had said, "That's not you." He took that conversation and handed it to her. That was the part I didn't tell Renee. That was the part I had to sit with entirely alone. I scrolled further back. 14 months in, Tanya started forwarding him documents. Not personal things, work things. Internal sales reports from a restricted company database. Competitive intelligence on regional accounts, projected numbers, client lists. Dion's name wasn't on the access list for those files. Tanya's was. She had pulled them and sent them directly to his personal number, and he had used them. His target numbers for 3 consecutive quarters appeared in the thread, cross-referenced with data that had no business leaving that system. I screenshotted everything, the insults, the dates, the documents, every page of it. I forwarded the full thread to my attorney with one line. See attached. Please advise on HR exposure. Read data sharing. She replied in 11 minutes. On it. I set the tablet face down on the workbench. I sat there with it for as long as I needed to. No specific amount of time, just until the cold, still feeling settled into something I could carry without it weighing wrong. I had learned by then that grief doesn't wait for a convenient moment. You give it its time, or it takes more than you offered. When I was ready, I got up. I finished boxing Dion's things, the cables, the jacket, the conference mug. I taped the box closed and carried it to the front door and set it down. Then I went to the kitchen and started making dinner. 5 months after Dion left. He called on a Sunday. Not through his attorney, not through a mutual contact. Himself, directly on my cell phone at 2:17 in the afternoon while I was sitting at my kitchen table going through a vendor contract. I looked at his name on the screen for 2 full rings. I answered. He said he wanted to talk, said he thought they owed each other that much. They. As if we were still a unit, as if that word still belonged to him. I told him to pick a time. He said that day if I was open. I told him the coffee shop on Peachtree near the old bookstore. My choice, my neighborhood. He said yes before I finished the sentence. I put my coat on and drove over. I got there first and chose a table by the window. You know what I noticed the moment he walked in? The clothes were right. The shoes were right. But everything underneath was wrong. Dion had always moved through a room like he expected it to reorganize itself around him. That was gone. He came through the door, scanning the space carefully, the way you do when you're not sure of your welcome. And when he spotted me, he did something I had never once seen him do before. He looked relieved just to find me still sitting there. He was thinner, not dramatically, but enough. He looked like a man who had stopped sleeping well and was hoping it didn't show. He sat down across from me and ordered a coffee he barely touched, and then he started talking. At first he tried the charm, old habit. He smiled and said I looked good, which was true and which I did not acknowledge, and made a small joke about the traffic on Peachtree that landed in the silence between us and died there quietly. I waited. He moved on. Then came the remorse. Carefully constructed, I could tell, rehearsed in a mirror somewhere, probably more than once. He said he had been doing a lot of thinking, said he had made a serious mistake, the worst mistake of his life if he was being honest, and that he had spent the last few months understanding the full scope of what he threw away. He said Tanya wasn't what he believed she was, that the whole thing had been, and here he paused and chose the word deliberately, intoxicating, in a way that blinded him to what actually mattered. He said that wasn't an excuse. Then he spent the next 4 minutes making it one. My hands were still on the table. He said he had never stopped loving me, that what we built together was real, and he had been too foolish and too selfish to protect it. He said people made mistakes. He said good people made terrible mistakes, and the measure of a man was whether he was willing to stand up and own it. He said he was standing up. He used the phrase, willing to do the work, twice. He said he believed they could find their way back if I was willing to try. Then the desperation came through the rehearsal like a crack in a wall. Nadia. He leaned forward, his voice dropped. I know what NW Collective is now. I know what it's worth. And I want you to know that has nothing to do with why I'm here. I'm not here about money. I'm here because I love you, and I was an idiot, and I don't want to spend the rest of my life knowing I walked out on the best thing I ever had. He reached across the table. I looked at his hand. I did not take it. We were good together, he said. You know we were good. 11 years, Nadia. That means something. That has to mean something. I know I hurt you. I know it's going to take time. But I'm asking you. I'm asking. Just tell me there's a chance. Just give me something to work with here. I'll move back. I'll start over. Whatever you need. I have learned things about myself these past few months that I should have figured out years ago, and I know that's on me. I do. But I am a different man than the one who left. I swear to you I am. He stopped. The coffee shop hummed around us. Someone's cup clinked against a saucer 2 tables over. Outside the window, a woman walked past pushing a stroller, not looking in. I let the silence sit for a moment. Then I reached into my bag. I set the envelope on the table and slid it across to him. Flat, sealed, his name written on the front in my attorney's handwriting. The divorce decree, signed and finalized. His own attorney had advised him to settle quickly, 3 weeks ago, before the full asset picture was on the table. He had signed it. It was done. It had been done. He looked at the envelope. He looked at me. I stood up and put on my coat. I hope you find what you're looking for. I walked to the door and pushed through it into the afternoon light. He didn't follow. I knew he wouldn't. I didn't look back. I had given that man 11 years. He wasn't getting another minute. 6 months after the divorce closed, I was at my desk on a Wednesday morning when Renee sent me a link without a single word of explanation. She didn't need one. I clicked it. LinkedIn. Tanya Briggs. Dion's former colleague and the woman whose initials I had found engraved in a bracelet in my own guest bedroom, had updated her profile. The banner across her photo read, "Open to work." I set my phone down and looked at it for a moment. Then I picked it back up and read the profile more carefully, the way you do when something confirms exactly what you already knew was coming. The HR investigation had concluded 2 weeks earlier. I knew the broad strokes. My attorney had kept me informed enough to understand the shape of it. Tanya had been accessing a restricted internal sales database without authorization and forwarding reports directly to Dion. 2 years of it. Enough to build a performance record on. Enough to look like the most prepared man in every regional meeting. The company called it what it was. She was terminated. You know what the interesting part was? Dion didn't get to walk away clean either. Once the investigation traced the reports back to his inbox, once they looked at 2 years of his numbers against 2 years of intelligence he had no legitimate access to, the story of the star regional sales manager fell apart pretty fast. They put him on a performance improvement plan. Then they demoted him. His income dropped by almost a third overnight. I want you to understand something about that. I did not arrange it. I filed the HR complaint because my attorney told me the text thread gave me every right to, and because Tanya had used company resources to help a man deceive me. The consequences that followed were the company's doing, not mine. I did not have to engineer his fall. He had built it himself, brick by brick, for 2 years, and all I did was hand someone a flashlight. Renee had told me the rest in pieces, the way she always delivered information she knew would sting, a little at a time, checking my temperature as she went. 4 months after the divorce closed, Tanya left him. I remember the morning Renee told me. I was standing at the kitchen counter with my coffee, still in my robe, and she said it the way you say something you've been sitting on for 3 days, carefully, watching for my reaction. I didn't give her much of one. My hands stayed wrapped around the mug. I just nodded at the phone like she could see me. It made complete sense. Tanya had never been after Dion, the person. She had been after Dion, the access point, the income, the social footing, the feeling of being chosen by a man who seemed like he was going somewhere. When the income dropped and the status evaporated, and the man who had seemed so certain of himself turned out to be renting a studio apartment in a building he used to point at from the highway and call that complex, there was nothing left worth staying for. She wanted a seat at a table. He no longer had a table. I thought about the text thread on that old tablet. "Babe, you deserve so much better." I thought about how quickly so much better stopped being him. Then I stopped thinking about it, because I had work to do. The text came on a Saturday, 3 weeks after I heard about Tanya leaving. I was in the spare room, the door propped open, the formulation shelves reorganized, morning light cutting across the corkboard of old rejection letters I had never taken down. My phone was on the workbench beside me. It buzzed once. Dion. A single line. "I hope you're happy." I read it. I set the phone face down on the workbench. I sat there for a second with my hands flat on the table, looking at the first Crown Theory prototype on the shelf, that unlabeled jar from 9 years ago, when I was working past midnight in this same room while he slept 10 feet down the hall without a single question about what I was building. Was I happy? That wasn't the right question. What I was clear. Clear in a way I hadn't been in years. Clear the way a room feels after you've taken out everything that didn't belong there. I did not reply. There was nothing in that text worth answering. It wasn't a question. It wasn't an apology. It was a man reaching out to find out if he still existed to me. And the truest, most complete thing I could give him was silence. I left the phone face down and went back to my board materials. At my desk, with the pen in my hand and the quarterly review spread open in front of me, I looked up once. Through the open spare room door, I could see straight down the hallway. The kitchen, the front entryway, the afternoon light sitting easy on the hardwood floor. This house. Fully mine. Legally, finally, without question, mine. I looked at it for exactly 1 breath. Then I picked up my pen and went back to work. 1 year after the divorce closed, I was late to my own party. Not by much, 12 minutes maybe, but I had a photographer arriving at 10 sharp and a trade magazine editor who had emailed 3 times in the past week alone, and I was standing in my bedroom at 9:48 trying to decide between 2 pairs of earrings like the answer actually mattered. It did, a little. I chose the gold ones. Small, simple, mine. I could already hear Renee downstairs, her laugh cutting through the low hum of the catering staff she had personally vetted and then hovered over all morning like a woman who did not fully trust anyone to arrange a cheese board correctly. I heard her say something I couldn't make out, and then I heard a man laugh, and then I heard her say, "That's what I thought," in the tone she reserved for people who had briefly underestimated her. I put in the second earring and looked at myself in the mirror. Let me tell you something about that moment. It was not cinematic. I was not transformed. I looked like myself, 37 years old, a little tired, a little nervous, wearing my own product in my hair and my own earrings and the blazer I had pressed the night before. I looked exactly like the woman I had always been. That was the whole point. The spare room was unrecognizable in the best way. Renee and 2 of my Northwest Collective team members had spent the previous Saturday repositioning everything. The formulation shelves were lit from below now, product iterations from all 9 years lined up in chronological order, like a timeline of stubbornness. The corkboard of rejection letters was framed. Actually framed, behind glass, hung on the wall where Dion's old golf bags used to lean. The first Crown Theory prototype sat in a small case at the center of the display table, unlabeled, exactly as it had always been. Press contacts moved through the space quietly, taking it in. Retail partners ran their fingers along the product line. A woman from a beauty trade publication stood in front of the rejection letter display for a long time, without saying anything. I knew what she was thinking. I had thought it too, on the bad nights. Renee found me near the doorway between the spare room and the hallway. She was grinning in the way she only grins when she is proud of something and trying not to make a production of it. She handed me a glass of water. She didn't say anything. She just looked at the room and then looked at me. "Don't," I said. "I'm not doing anything," she said. She absolutely was. The photographer from the trade magazine found me a few minutes later. She asked if I would stand in the doorway, the threshold between the hallway and the room. I said yes. I stood where she told me to stand. She adjusted the light twice, stepped back, looked through her lens. "Just look at the room," she said. I did. I looked at 9 years of work on those shelves. I looked at the label of the first prototype, which had no label at all, just a piece of masking tape with a date written in my own handwriting. I thought about the night I mixed that first batch at midnight, half asleep, with a second-hand mixer and a prayer and exactly $800 in my business account. I thought about how I had tiptoed back to bed so I wouldn't wake Dion, my hands smelling like shea and rosemary, careful not to disturb a man who was, at that very moment, 2 years away from deciding I had peaked. The photographer said, "Perfect." I believed her. By 8 that evening, the last guest was gone. Renee stayed. Of course she did. She kicked off her heels by the kitchen door and helped herself to the leftover rosemary focaccia without asking, which was the correct thing to do. I poured us both wine. We sat at the kitchen table with the remains of a very good event between us. Empty glasses, a half-finished charcuterie board, a linen napkin that had been folded into a swan at some point and was now just a linen napkin. At some point she said something about the cheese board, and I said something back, and then we were laughing. The real kind. The kind that takes a second to build and then won't stop. It was not about anything significant. That was the point. It was the specific luxury of laughing about something small, with someone who knows everything, in a house that is entirely yours. We sat there until almost 10. After Renee left, I moved through the kitchen, rinsing glasses, turning off the overhead light over the stove, doing the small automatic things you do at the end of a long and meaningful day. I passed the junk drawer. I stopped. I opened it. The hotel receipt was there. Dion's name, the Atlanta date, the conference that was never a conference, and next to it, the gold bracelet. Small, delicate, TB engraved inside the clasp, just like the morning I'd found it in my own guest bedroom and stood there in the quiet, deciding what kind of woman I was going to be about it. I picked up the bracelet. I held it for a moment. It was lighter than I remembered. I dropped it in the trash. I closed the drawer. I turned off the kitchen light. I went to bed. Thank you for watching until the end. If this story meant something to you, hit subscribe and turn on notifications. I've got 2 stories on the screen that you have to watch next. Have a great day!